Sometimes life gets really lonely, and especially during the pandemic, I think everybody had a taste of like, wow, this is lonely. Even if you were in a house full of family and kids, there was something different. We weren't able to get out and meet people and make new friends and make new connections and feel that dopamine of being alive in the world. And it's really hit home for a lot of people to know the difference. Now that they're getting out more, they're saying, wow, did I miss this? Or wait a second, I'm really out of practice. In the corporate space specifically, it's still a really murky area, right? You're working with someone, you don't know if you should become close to them, but yet it's really been proven. Data shows that people who really are fond of each other and like each other at work and feel connected, they're more productive. So there's a lot of programs out there to help people understand how to build better bridges of connection and community at work. And then there's that whole weird area at a personal level when you're getting out in the world and you want to make more friends. How do you do it? And what magic do you need to have in your little bag of tricks to connect to people? And you don't really want it to be an effort, but sometimes you have to kind of take some risks and be vulnerable and make an effort. Today we're going to talk about this with Brian Miller, who basically is a human connection speaker, and he helps corporations, he helps individuals talk about, how do you communicate with clarity, of course, but how do you also communicate so you have that beautiful connection, that you can sustain that connection. It's all kind of delicious stuff in my eyes, because I think we're all better off when we're feeling in community. So Brian, I'm really moved by your TED Talk that I watched, and I'm moved by the way you make a living right now, which is just to be part of organizations that are trying to build a connected culture. So thank you for being with us and helping us kind of talk about this. So I'm going to pass the baton over to you and sort of ask you, what's on your mind right now? What's making you feel moved as a connection person? What's missing, and what are you hoping to build more in terms of like what's your goal for 2023? What opportunities are you seeing that are really in front of you that you're going to just say, wow, this is an area I really want to bring better human connection in? So I guess that leads us to this question of how in your professional world you feel like you can measure impact. How do you know when you've done something and people are better connected?
Ooh, this is a good one, Deborah. I will stay tuned for when he chimes in and when others chime in, because this is an area that I struggle with professionally. Personally, not so much. And I know I've said on this platform before that I am an introvert. If you ask people who are still getting to know me, we're on that journey of getting to know one another, they hear that and they'll say, I'm surprised you are an extrovert. That doesn't seem likely. You're always out and about and you're doing this. But I'm like, and when I get home, I'm exhausted. When I'm in my car, I'm exhausted. I'm riding in the car without the music playing because I just need that silence. I need all of the silence and alone time I can to recharge and to charge to prepare for the event or the outing or whatever the activity is. And then afterwards to replenish myself. And where I struggle at work is just believing in the authenticity of those attempts to connect, because I've had more examples in the work setting where people started out where I perceived as authentic, and as soon as I let my guard down and open up a little bit more, then comes the drama, and then I close myself back up again. And so, yeah, I would love to hear what the expert has to say.
Hey, Deborah, thanks so much for passing this off to me. And there were so many things to think about in your opening kind of summary of how you came to this topic and how you're thinking about human connection today. I'd like to take a few minutes to just talk about what's going on right now with the work from home, hybrid work, the move back to the office kind of conversation that we're having globally right now. I mean, obviously we're seeing very high profile figures, Elon Musk and Bob Iger and folks like that, who are insisting that employees come back to the office. And and I brought up those two examples because they represent very different ways that leaders are approaching this. I think there's a temptation to think that all CEOs, all executives are just evil and they just want us in the office and they want to just like keep their eye on us. But, Elon and Bob Iger seem to be approaching this from different vantage points, and I can see both of them, and I can also see why people are resisting. So, Elon, it's hard to tell. So much has gone on publicly with Elon lately that he's a bit of an enigma, always has been. He's definitely made some very curious, probably very bad choices lately regarding Twitter and all kinds of things. But, he's insisting that Twitter employees come back to the office. He did that right away, right? He insisted Twitter employees come back to the office. And his reasoning pretty much boiled down to productivity. We have work to do and we need to be here to do it. And I think people had a really visceral reaction against that because there's plenty of studies and research that show that people can be more productive at home, and certainly people feel like they're being more productive at home, or at least as productive. But then when I heard Bob Iger recently, the CEO of Disney, who famously just came back after 2 years off, basically, to save Disney. Bob Iger's bringing people back because of a much more understandable reason. He's saying at least 4 days a week employees have to be in the office because that's where creativity and collaboration happen. And it's just not the same on Zoom or on the phone or in text. We don't have the same creative or collaborative culture that we do when we're not physically present. And I think there's something about being in person, sharing physical space together, that is in many ways, I think, is often less efficient. It's less quote unquote productive, depending on how you measure productivity. Like if you're Elon thinking of productivity as an engineer, then being in person might be more productive. But if you're thinking of productivity as less of a what can I wring out of each of these people and more of a, what kind of space can I create in which beautiful things can happen, I think what Bob Iger is hinting at here is that when we're physically sharing a space together, there's something about synchronicity and inspiration and the colliding of ideas that just doesn't happen the same way on Zoom. Now, as a dad of a 2.5-year-old toddler who, has had the incredible joy, I've had the great joy of working from home the last 2 years. I didn't have to be, almost 3 years now? Jesus. Sorry, just had that moment. I haven't had to be on the road as a speaker 250 days a year the way I used to. This is a beautiful thing for me. But at the same time, it is very difficult to have great collaborative, creative work happen on Zoom, partly because you lose the ability to interrupt each other, right? Like Zoom in particular, video mediums, when one person talks over the other, the audio cuts out, it doesn't work. It's really a broadcast medium. I talk, then you talk, then I talk. And that is not collaborative. It is not creative. And it doesn't have the collision of ideas that make human connection so valuable and so rewarding. So those are just a few opening thoughts here. I'd love to see where you take that. Hey, thanks so much for chiming in with a really, really valuable insight here about the way that introverts have to navigate the workplace. Now, I'm an extrovert. I'm an aggressive extrovert, but my wife is an introvert, and there's a whole chapter in one of the early chapters of my book. There's a whole section about introverts and how we misunderstand what introversion actually is. And you actually hit on it beautifully, of course, because you get it, because you're an introvert, which is, introversion and extroversion is not about shyness. That is a different thing. Being shy is a different thing. That introversion and extroversion is about energy and how we gain or drain energy. Extroverts gain energy from socializing. We drain energy from alone time. Introverts drain energy from socializing and gain energy from alone time, which doesn't mean introverts don't enjoy socializing. You do. I know you do. Many introverts do. However, I also know that many introverts quickly drain their entire battery in just 30 minutes or an hour of socializing, and then need to go read a book for 8 hours, with a warm cup of tea to recharge their battery. My wife is one of those people. Whereas if you put me in a conference with 3,000 people and say, go, I can talk for 12 straight hours and only power up more and more throughout the day. And then if you give me 1 hour of alone time, I drain my energy so quickly. And that was such a struggle in the days of the pandemic for me, when I spent that we were all isolated, but for me as an extreme extrovert who draws all his energy from socializing, it was a tremendously taxing, first 6 months before I kind of got the hang of how can I replicate that experience or approximate that experience in a world where we can't actually interact. And for the first 2 years of the pandemic, it was very much that question. So getting back to the question of, how do I engage in the workplace as an introvert once I open myself up? And then you said, and then the drama starts. And I don't know exactly what you mean by and then the drama starts. I would want to know a little bit more about that. But my guess is that it's something along the lines of people recognize intuitively that as an introvert, your superpower is listening. It's funny, introverts are much better at connecting with people naturally than extroverts are. It's the opposite of what people would think, right? People think extroverts connect with people, but mostly extroverts talk at people. Extroverts are great at talking, and that can carry the day at a party, a lot of charisma, but it wears thin over time when people don't feel heard or seen or understood. And so, for me, this is my big thing. I'm an extrovert. And so it's so funny, there's an old expression, the preacher always gives the sermon they themselves need to hear. The author always writes the book they themselves need to read. I was the worst at this. I struggled to connect with people for most of my childhood. This is the story of my TED Talk, the story of my book. I really struggled to connect with people personally and professionally because I was too focused on the talking. And I cared about people, but they didn't feel cared about. They didn't feel understood by me because I was so focused on the talking end of the conversation. And once I was able to adopt the posture of listening, of being quiet, of engaging, of letting the space breathe for people, and really giving them the space to be heard and be understood and be valued and feel that, it was incredible. Now you're an introvert, so you actually do that naturally, much more naturally than extroverts do. And I'm guessing that so many of the extroverts in your office pick up on that, and they actually feel understood by you or feel seen or feel heard in a way they don't usually, which is where they can cross the line and accidentally end up oversharing, which you're going to, of course, interpret as drama or a distraction. None of that I just said was a solution, but I think it's an interesting place to start as an understanding of what's happening.
Wow, I loved how your reply to me moved into your reply to Harsusi, because you said something about listening that I really want to lean into with my next topic. It's your perspective on remote versus in-person collaborative spirit resonates with me so much. But the example you gave didn't. So let me just frame this really well. This has to do with the listening comment. When you talked about the vibe that people have back and forth, and when you're in Zoom, it doesn't work. What I'm discovering in asynchronous conversations in the last couple of years on Swell is something that is equally valuable, because I listen to you and I can interrupt you, but I'm not necessarily thinking about what I'm going to say next because I have the luxury of time. So when I choose to say something, I've said it fully in my own present tense thinking of it. I didn't have to think about it while I listened to you. And I think especially for introverts, it's really good to know that someone is deeply listening to you. It gives them more confidence to say what they're going to say. But to the point you're making, the really valuable point about what is collaboration, it's still an interesting conversation that we need to keep on having, because there is something about being in a room with somebody and kind of going back and forth and having that vibrational intensity between the two of you, and something happens because of that. And you might have interrupted me. I might have interrupted you, but it's okay because we're doing this bantering and we're back and forth and things are happening and I'm snapping my finger and boom. But the deep listening isn't happening. And so when you have an introvert in the room, they just get smaller and smaller because they don't feel safe. So I think culturally speaking, it's interesting to create spaces where we say, I'm listening, you have the floor, but we're going to go ahead and iterate somehow. And that's something that I don't know the secret sauce to, but I think the important vocabulary words to put into this session with you is, how do you have deep listening when the room is filled with energy? And how do you iterate when there's distance? I think I'm going to stop here and just let you respond to that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Of course, I haven't been thinking about remote conversations, remote communication in an asynchronous manner like Swell, because this is an unusual and a new kind of a platform. It's interesting. This feels a little bit like leaving voicemails back and forth. But obviously in a more personal way. Plus, you have longer and of course it's engaging and interactive on this platform in a way that voicemail is not. I think let me take a few of those points. I think you and I may slightly disagree on. Well, no, I don't think we're disagreeing. What I think we're doing is we're seeing that there are two different kinds of connection and two different kinds of conversation, and they're both valuable and they both have a place, and we need to be intentional about making sure there's a mix of each of them. When you say that, you get to fully respond to what I'm saying by having taken time to think about it and saying it exactly the way you want to, I think, yes, that's valuable, but only sometimes, because there's so much lost when you have time to really think about what you want to say and make sure every single word is coming out exactly right, and do it and do a do-over, and if you want to, you don't, it's not actually happening in real time. In other words, there's something about it almost feels like I'm not being held responsible for what I'm saying right now because it's asynchronous and I don't have to post this. I could choose to hit pause, to stop, to back up, to not hit post, and I could just try again. And you can't do that in the room, in a real conversation. There's no takebacks, which means in that moment while you're conversing with someone, while you're having, you're seeking connection, you're seeking collaboration, you're seeking a way to move together towards something new. You're building something together, and because it's happening in real time, and there are no takebacks, and anything that comes out is not necessarily exactly what you wanted to say or what you could have said. There's some downsides to that. We make mistakes, but there's also an upside to that, is that it's very human. I feel like I really get to know somebody when it's in person and in real time because of the mistakes, and because you can I can say something and I can watch your face change just a little bit, and my brain can go, I'm not sure if that landed the way I wanted it to, and let me see if it did, or ask a follow-up on that, or recorrect, or we can actually workshop. Whereas right now, I'm speaking with you, but I'm kind of monologuing, and I'm not really feeling the responsibility of what I'm saying to the degree that I would face-to-face in real time, where I can't edit myself or take a day to decide how I want to respond. So I think, however, so that's the downside, I think. But the upside, of course, is that I get to, we get to say exactly what we want to say, and we get to truly reflect on the meaning of the words of the other person, which you don't get to do in real-time conversation when there's energy and we're firing back and forth. And so I think, the answer is yes, and, it's a both, it's a both situation. Like, I think when it comes to going back to the office, the question has never been, I don't think it's ever been, should we fully go back to the office the way it always was? I think clearly no. But I think much is being lost in the way of connection and collaboration and idea creation by having Zoom conversations that are broadcast based, and even this kind of asynchronous conversation. I use voice messaging apps with my team, and we do this, right? Asynchronous just as a team, and it works. But then once a week we get on a call and we have a real time conversation, so that we can just spit stuff out and figure things out in the moment and risk offending each other or rubbing each other the wrong way and going, no, that's not what I meant, and there's value in that too. So I think the conversation is really, how do we find the mix of both, how much of each, and how to be intentional.
Exactly. Wow. Perfectly framed. Yes. And I hold people sometimes more responsible when I know they've thought about something. That means they really mean what they're saying, as opposed to, it was in the heat of the moment, she didn't mean what she said. So it's really interesting to look at both as a way of accountability and of responsibility to the medium itself. Which brings me to my next question. Excuse my mouth, it's a little cold. I'm walking in what I call cold weather in Los Angeles. You would laugh probably. When you help people do preparation for a TED Talk, which I know you're really good at, that's what you do. How do you help people create an atmosphere where people don't feel talked at, where they don't feel like they're looking at a monologue on stage and they can just go, I could be here or not be here. I could be in my room watching it on a screen. I could be in the same venue, but this person is just talking at me. But I know that great TED Talks are very inclusive, even though they're just one way, because the person has sort of imbued the talk with their awareness of the person listening, with the authenticity that they really do want us to feel connected with, and we're not just bodies in a chair. And I know that has to be taught a little bit. That awareness has to be brought up and say, hey, if you're going to do a great TED Talk and you're just standing up there spewing language, it's never going to hit people's hearts. How do you impart that kind of awareness, and what tools do you give people to actually be really inclusive and really dynamic and really, even though it's one way, it feels circular?
Ooh, I love this question. This is a really insightful question because it's one of the hardest things about giving a TED Talk. There's something really interesting about the TED Talk medium that mostly doesn't exist anywhere in the field of speaking, professionally or otherwise, which is that the ultimate audience of the talk is not the people in the seats. This is really hard, especially if you're a professional speaker or someone who's used to speaking, or an entertainer or magician like I was at the time when I first gave mine. You're used to working with the audience, just being fully present for the people in the seats in front of you. That's your job. And if they happen to be recording it, like if the conference is recording your speech, they're going to show it later. The people watching later know it wasn't really for them. It's really the opposite with a TED Talk. The people in the seats know that it's really not for them, or at least most of them do, that the ultimate audience of the talk is on YouTube later. And so this creates a very strange dynamic for the speaker, where you need to be speaking conversationally, inclusively, in a way that reaches the eventual YouTube viewer. So I joke with my clients. I say, listen, the person you're trying to reach is the person who's scrolling YouTube at 1 a.m. They've got one sock half off. They've got Cheetos, just like crumbs dripping down their shirt. They've got one earbud in. The dog is barking, and the TV's on. And they start watching your video, and your job is to get them to shut off the TV, tell the dog to stop barking, put their other earbud in, get rid of the crumbs in their shirt, lean up and focus. I mean, that's your job. And so you need to talk to that person, because that's the ultimate goal. And that's the person who's going to spread the talk and share it and, tag their friends or send it to their boss. I mean, that's where ideas spread. So some of the ways that we do that, there's a classic speaking technique that I'm always shocked more people haven't heard of. And it's a really important one. And it's this. Let's say you have an audience of 100 people. You don't want to speak to 100 people. You want to speak to one person times 100. In other words, you want to have a conversation with one person in the audience. And if you can move over the course of your presentation from speaking with this person to speaking with that person to speaking with her at the back and then him at the front, if you can, over the course of your presentation, carry on a one-to-one conversation with individuals, the entire audience will feel that connection. And amazingly, that translates through the screen. And so that's like my number one piece of advice for speakers generally, but especially for TEDx speakers and TED Talkers who are going for the ultimate, YouTube viewer, is you really want to have a conversation with one person. And I usually say, if you could not imagine yourself saying this sitting across from someone having coffee, it's probably too theatrical. It's probably too rehearsed. It's probably too stiff or memorized. Even though TEDx Talks are memorized. They are memorized cold.
Oh my goodness, thank you for responding to my comment. I participate in so many of these, and that rarely happens, so I do appreciate it because it creates a necessary and important dialogue that generates understanding. So let me provide a little bit more context because it actually happened today. We're in this meeting preparing for an audit, a compliance audit that might happen next week. And there is an area of grave noncompliance for our organization. And so the person who's head of the area that has the grave issue of noncompliance speaks up and says, oh, wow, yeah, there is some drift and I don't know why people are not being compliant. And you know what? I'm only one person as a leader. Look, why don't we do like a blurb where we then share it with frontline staff that all work together, and we just put it on them to hold each other accountable to meet the criteria. And the leader continues to say, I just don't know why people won't point something out to someone else and say, like, you are not doing the right thing. He was like, I even have leaders. This was a VP. He was like, I even have middle management leaders come to me and say, oh, look, I took a picture of someone who was not in compliance, but they did not actually say something to the person. And so I'm sitting there listening in this virtual meeting, and I'm like, okay, so if you can't handle it, middle management is not handling it, you think frontline staff are going to handle it? So I private message my director and I say, does our culture here support frontline team members holding medical providers accountable to be compliant with meeting the criteria? Would that be received well? If leaders aren't able to do it, is this the best course of action as we lead into auditors being on site next week? And so my director says, why don't you ask that openly amongst the group? And for a moment, my gut said, don't, just back out of it. But then I said, you know what, at the end of the day, we take care of patients and they depend on us. So let me not take on the attitude of, I already know our culture doesn't. Let me just say it. So I asked the question out, like, hey, I have a question. My question is, I heard it was proposed earlier that, C-suite leaders, middle management leaders aren't able to bring this group into compliance. And so we're going to educate frontline team members to be the eyes and ears and hold this group of team members responsible. Does our culture support that? And will that be successful? And it was immediately shot down. And in that moment, I felt not heard. I felt dismissed. I felt not respected as a colleague. I felt, and we all know that feelings are not facts, but it was just like, I said something that was worth, and I'm not one of those people that air quotation compete for airtime. When I speak, it's because I really have something to say. Otherwise, I stay quiet, because I know at the end of the day, people are going to do what they want to do anyway. And so when it was just like, look, they might be here, they being the auditors might be here next week, and so we're going to move forward with this plan. Okay, next on the agenda. And I was like, whoa. So it's things like that where I say the drama begins because then it's, I'm told to open up and speak and say and contribute, but then it's not honored in a way that lands as respectful and of value for me as an introvert. Like, no one doesn't pause and say, wait, JL said something, and she rarely says something. So if she is speaking, it must be of importance. And I get people don't know me. So when I have my one-on-ones with my leader, and I actually had a one-on-one with her VP because she just transitioned to a new VP. I even said that when she was like, give me a snippet about you. And I said, hey, I'm one of these people. I'm an introvert. I don't compete for airtime. If I have something to say, it's because it's really important to me. And it's a hill I'm willing to die on usually. And sometimes it's not. I feel accountable and responsible to put it out there in the atmosphere for people to hear it and possibly do something with it. Otherwise, I don't feel the need to always talk just to be talking. So I just wanted to give a little bit more context, and hopefully that's helpful. Again, I appreciate you for responding to my comment.
The magic words here are definitely not just building a connection, but sustaining a connection. It's all about sustaining it all. I noticed that after COVID, I being a spa owner and life coach, it was kind of hard. I have to admit, like reestablishing, connecting with people, because we've been out of touch. I mean, I was doing Zoom calls and all that, but even my one-on-one, when I do my esthetician services, it was kind of weird. I have to admit, getting back together with people and talking to them and building rapport and breaking the ice. I don't know if it was just me, but I was wondering if it happened to anyone else after the pandemic.
Hi, yeah. So I mean, what you're describing there. So thank you for fleshing out what you meant by drama. So it's not what I was imagining, and that's why I was I'm thrilled that you were able to give me more details about that. So what you're describing is unfortunately just incredibly common in the corporate world, right? And what happens is that ideas and perspectives are not valued and they're not recognized, and introverts end up taking the brunt of that because extroverts have a way of kind of barreling through and being annoying and loud and obnoxious and being the squeaky wheel that even though there's a culture that doesn't respect new ideas, extroverts have a way of kind of pushing through that and getting noticed anyway, but introverts don't, by definition. And I get it. My wife would always describe that experience of having spent her whole life, waiting for the right moment to talk, thinking really hard about what she wanted to say, not wanting to open her mouth until she was sure it was going to be valuable. And then when she finally, once in a blue moon, got a chance to say something, that somebody would just end up cutting her off or ignoring her anyway. And so at some point in her life, she just said, well, forget it. Why even bother? And then of course that spirals, because then you're the quiet person that never contributes. And so people think that you don't have anything to say. And, and so introverts definitely do struggle, in the regular world of work. Now, what I would say to that is, this is one of those situations where I hesitate to give individuals advice on how to change that, because I do think the responsibility largely falls on leadership, which is why I work mostly with leadership and I don't do personal self-help work with individuals, because I think it's very dangerous for me to give you advice on how you can be more assertive act more like an extrovert in a broken system feels like putting the responsibility on the wrong person and shifting the blame. What really needs to happen is the culture of your environment needs to change from the top down, from the leadership. And that's the work that I do with companies. But what I would say to you is you would probably have a better chance as an introvert in getting a one-on-one meeting or a personal meeting with some of the folks that are higher up, that are actually in the decision-making process, and being able to voice your concerns or your opinions or your insights in a one-on-one environment, because you're more likely to be heard there than in a group setting where somebody running the meeting is in a leadership position. They've got a lot of ego. They've got a whole room of people looking at them. They're going to shut down anything that disagrees with them to maintain their status. Remember, people are motivated by status more than almost anything else. And so if you're challenging their status in front of the group, it's an uphill battle no matter who you are, but definitely if you're an introvert. So I would, if I were offering you specific advice as an individual to take power back in a situation where I believe the vast majority of the responsibility is on the culture and the leadership, I would tell you to pursue more one-on-one time with decision makers and build those relationships deeper. And of course, like you said, you kind of do, if you're not known, if you're not a known quantity within your company yet, you need to, oh gosh, there was a great TED Talk last year that came out. Oh man, she's so famous and I forget her name right now, but it was about how to find the person who's going to help you get ahead at work. In other words, you need to find a sponsor, someone who's going to speak up on your behalf, who is already in a position of power, and build a relationship with that person. And that's how you're going to start getting respected. But again, the system's broken, obviously, and you're clearly in a culture that is unfortunately very common. So I wish you the best, and let's continue a dialogue if there's anything I can help with. You are not alone. I literally make a living as a human connection specialist, and I also struggled when we first started emerging from the pandemic back into real world interaction, social environments, with how exactly to navigate all of this. And part of the problem is that everybody has a different level of interest or engagement or willingness to do that. And so, for me as a really, really outgoing extrovert who's used to just talking to everybody, I found that people were they were like strangers in line at coffee, were less willing to have a random conversation with me than they were, or at least they needed more opening up, or there needed to be a little bit more of a lead-in, a warmer introduction. I couldn't just start a conversation the way that I used to. So yeah, no, you're not alone. I think that is actually been a very universal experience, particularly within the work setting, because most of the work I've been doing the last year and a half is helping companies move back from full remote to hybrid, and eventually to in person. I'm not convinced we'll ever go back fully in person, but moving back to the hybrid or in person model, teams just didn't know how to engage with each other in the real world. It was like everybody forgot how to people.